My house sold so fast that everyone around me treated it like a blessing. Bennett Cross, my real estate agent, called me the morning after the offer came in and said, "Vivienne, this is exactly what sellers dream about." My name is Vivienne Ashworth, and that was the moment I started to understand that the clean ending I thought I had been given may have been arranged to clean me out instead. Clean offer, fast close, no drama. At the time, I believed him. I was 41, newly divorced, trying to move out of a house that had held too many years of silence, arguments, and waiting for someone else to change. I did not want a drawn-out sale. I did not want strangers wandering through the rooms every weekend. I wanted a clean ending and a fresh start. So when Bennett told me the offer was strong, realistic, and probably the best I would see, I signed the papers with relief. Nearly a year later, I was sitting in a dentist waiting room, scrolling through listings I had no intention of buying, when I saw my old house back on the market for almost 40% more than I had sold it for. At first, I just stared at the photos. The blue front door I had painted myself was still there. The kitchen tile I had chosen after 3 weekends of samples was still there. The backyard maple, the built-in shelves, the little reading nook under the stairs, all of it looked almost exactly the same. The listing said tastefully updated, but the updates were small. New light fixtures, fresh paint in the guest bedroom, maybe a different bathroom mirror. Nothing that explained a price jump large enough to make my hands go cold. The house was in Lake Haven, a quiet neighborhood outside Portland, where old Craftsman homes sat under broad trees, and every third porch had a swing. I had lived there for 9 years. My ex-husband, Martin, had wanted the house more than I did during the divorce, mostly because he liked winning arguments, but he could not refinance it on his own. In the end, the settlement required us to sell and divide the proceeds. I was the one still living there while the paperwork finished, so most of the sale fell on me. I hired Bennett because he had sold 2 houses on my street, and because he had a polished, comforting way of talking. He wore careful suits, remembered people's children's names, and carried himself like a man who had already solved whatever problem you were about to bring him. When he first walked through my house, he tapped the door frames, looked at the windows, glanced at the basement, and told me I had a charming property in a desirable pocket of town. Then his tone shifted. He said the roof would scare some buyers. The kitchen was not quite current, and the market was showing signs of cooling. I remember standing beside the dining room table with a notebook in my hand, while he said, "We want to be strategic, not emotional. A house is worth what a ready buyer will pay today, not what we wish it would be worth." That sounded professional. It also sounded like something a woman going through a divorce should be mature enough to accept. Bennett suggested listing at $415,000. I asked whether that was low, because I had seen smaller houses nearby listed in the mid-4s. He explained that listing prices were not sale prices, and that sellers often chased numbers they never actually got. He showed me a few printed pages with highlighted figures, but I did not know enough to question which properties he had chosen. One had foundation issues. One backed onto a busy road. One was much smaller than mine, though he described it as comparable. I thought the differences were normal real estate details. Bennett kept saying, "The goal is certainty." That word landed on me hard. Certainty was exactly what I wanted. I was exhausted from divorce hearings, bank calls, packing boxes, and explaining to my mother that no, I was not falling apart. I was simply tired. When the offer came in at $405,000 after only 4 days, Bennett sounded almost triumphant. He told me the buyer was paying cash, waiving minor repair objections, and willing to close quickly. He said there had been interest but no serious competing offers. I asked if we should wait through the weekend. He gave a small pause, the kind that made me feel like I had asked an innocent but naive question. Then he said, "Vivienne, I would hate to see you lose a clean offer chasing a maybe." I signed. The buyer's name on the contract was Daphne Cole. I did not know her. Bennett presented her as an investor who bought selectively and moved quickly. He said she was practical, not sentimental, which he framed as an advantage because practical buyers did not drag sellers through emotional negotiations. The inspection came back with predictable comments about the roof age, old plumbing in the basement, and a few windows that needed work. Daphne asked for a small credit. Bennett advised me to accept because, as he put it, this buyer is already stretching for the property in its current condition. I remember that exact sentence because later it became one of the phrases I could not stop hearing in my head. Stretching for the property, she was not stretching. She was being handed a bargain by someone I had hired to protect me. The sale closed in early August. After commissions, closing costs, and the split with Martin, I had enough to rent a townhouse across town, pay off a credit card, and put some money away. I told myself I was lucky. People congratulated me on the fast sale. My sister Elaine brought takeout to my new place and said, "At least the house part is over." I agreed. I even sent Bennett a thank you email because I believed he had guided me through a difficult transition. He replied, "You handled a hard process with grace. Wishing you peace in your next chapter." It read beautifully. That was part of the problem. Bennett was very good at sounding like the person you needed him to be. For the next several months, I did not think much about the house. I missed the maple tree in October and the way the afternoon light used to fall across the living room floor, but I did not miss being tied to the life I had lived there. Then, 11 months after closing, the listing appeared. Same address, same bones, same neighborhood. Asking price $565,000. I clicked through every picture, looking for the transformation that would justify it. There was no new addition, no finished attic, no luxury kitchen, no dramatic landscaping. The listing copy praised original character, walkable streets, and a rare oversized lot. Those were all things my house had already had when I sold it. I pulled up the county records and confirmed Daphne Cole still owned it. I looked up the sale history. My sale price sat there in plain numbers, followed by the new listing price above it like an accusation. I sent the link to Elaine with the message, "Am I losing my mind?" She called within 2 minutes. "Viv, that cannot be right." I said, "Maybe the market jumped." She was quiet for a second, then said, "Not that much." Not for paint. I did what many people do when they sense something is wrong but do not yet want to admit how wrong. I tried to explain it away. Maybe there had been repairs I could not see. Maybe Daphne had replaced the roof and the listing simply did not mention it. Maybe houses in Lake Haven had exploded in value. Maybe Bennett had done his best, and I was being bitter because my old life was now worth more without me in it. I spent 2 nights comparing listings online. The more I looked, the worse I felt. Houses around mine had been selling in the high 4s and low 5s even around the time of my original sale. Some were smaller. Some had worse kitchens. One house on Marigold Lane, with no garage and a choppy layout, had sold for $486,000 3 weeks before mine closed. Another on Ellis Street, with fewer square feet and a tiny yard, had sold for $472,000. I had not seen those numbers during my sale. Bennett had not shown them to me. When I searched his old emails, I found his market analysis attached as a PDF. The properties he had selected made my home look weaker than it was. At the time, I had not known how to read that. Now it looked deliberate. Still, suspicion is not proof, and I knew enough not to march into accusations without facts. I called Bennett first, because part of me still hoped there was an explanation that would let me put the unease down. He answered warmly. "Vivienne, how are you?" "How is the new place?" I kept my voice steady and told him I had seen my former house listed at $565,000. There was the slightest pause. Then he said, "Yes, the market has been wild, you never know." I said, "It is almost 40% higher than what I sold it for." He gave a soft laugh, not cruel, exactly, but dismissive. Asking price is not sale price. Sellers can ask for anything. I told him the house looked nearly unchanged. He said investors often do work that photos did not reveal. I asked whether he had known Daphne Cole before the transaction. This time the pause was longer. "Real estate is a relationship business," he said. "I know many buyers." I asked the question more plainly. "Did you have a personal relationship with her?" His voice cooled. "Vivienne, I represented you properly. You accepted an offer that met your stated needs." When I hung up, my hands were shaking. Not because he had admitted anything, but because he had stopped sounding like my agent and started sounding like someone protecting himself. Elaine insisted I call an attorney. I resisted for a few days because lawyers meant money, and I had already spent enough of my life in legal offices during the divorce. But the feeling would not leave me alone. I found Priscilla Nakamura through a referral from a woman in my office who had dealt with a property disclosure issue. Priscilla's office was downtown, bright and narrow, with shelves full of thick binders and one tired plant leaning toward the window. She listened without interrupting while I told her everything, from Bennett's suggested listing price to Daphne's new listing. When I finished, she folded her hands and said, "The price difference alone is not enough. Markets move, buyers improve properties, sellers get lucky. What matters is what your property was reasonably worth when Bennett advised you, what he knew, what he failed to disclose, and whether the buyer had a relationship to him. I felt embarrassed by how relieved I was to hear someone arrange my worry into categories. Priscilla was not dramatic. She did not promise revenge. She said, "We start with valuation. If the house was worth close to what you received, this is painful but not actionable. If it was worth significantly more, then we ask why your agent guided you down." She recommended an independent appraisal expert named Howard Leung, who specialized in retrospective valuations for disputes. Retrospective meant he would assess what the house had likely been worth at the time I sold it, not what it was worth now. Howard asked for the closing statement, the listing agreement, Bennett's market analysis, inspection report, photographs from my listing, and any records of repairs. I sent everything I had. He also pulled MLS data that I could not access on my own. Waiting for his report was miserable. I would go to work, answer emails, sit in meetings, and suddenly remember Bennett saying, "This buyer is already stretching." At night I reread old messages and felt foolish for every friendly line I had sent him. But Priscilla warned me not to confuse shame with responsibility. "You hired a licensed professional because you were not expected to be your own broker," she said. "If he abused that trust, that is on him." Howard's report arrived 3 weeks later. Priscilla asked me to come in rather than discuss it over the phone. That told me enough. She slid the report across the table, and I saw the conclusion before I understood the supporting pages. As of the date I accepted Daphne Cole's offer, Howard estimated the fair market value of my house between $485,000 and $505,000, with a most probable value of $495,000. I had sold for $405,000. The difference was not a little optimism or a lucky later sale. It was roughly $90,000, possibly more. Howard's analysis was precise and painful. He adjusted for square footage, lot size, condition, location, garage, roof age, and interior updates. He included comparable sales Bennett had not shown me. He explained that my house's oversized lot and intact original details added value in that neighborhood, while the roof age supported a modest adjustment, not a collapse in price. The supposed weaknesses Bennett had emphasized were real but overstated. The properties he had used in his analysis were inferior in ways that made his recommended price appear reasonable, only if you ignored better data. Priscilla watched me read, then said, "This supports a serious question about whether his advice served your interest." I asked, "Is it enough?" She said, "It is enough to keep going." The next question was Daphne Cole. I searched her name online and found very little. A few property records, a landscaping business registered years earlier, a social media profile with privacy settings. Priscilla said we needed to confirm whether Bennett had a relationship with her, not just suspect it. She recommended a private investigator named Marisol Vance. I pictured someone theatrical because television had ruined my imagination, but Marisol was a compact woman in her 50s with silver hair, practical shoes, and a voice that made every sentence sound like a fact already verified. We met in a coffee shop because she said her office was mostly file cabinets and bad lighting. She asked me for Daphne's full name, the sale documents, Bennett's brokerage information, and any emails mentioning the buyer. Then she said, "I am looking for connections that should have been disclosed. Family, business, shared addresses, joint entities, repeated transactions, anything like that." I asked how long it would take. "Depends how careful they were," she said. That sentence stayed with me. It implied there might have been something to hide. While Marisol worked, the new listing went pending. I watched it happen online with a sick, helpless feeling. Daphne was about to profit from my house a second time, and I still did not know if I could do anything about it. The final sale recorded at $552,000. I stared at that number for a long time. She had bought my house for $405,000 and sold it less than a year later for $552,000 after what appeared to be mostly cosmetic changes. Even after costs, the profit was enormous. It was money that should have helped me rebuild after my divorce. It could have strengthened my savings, helped me buy again someday, or simply given me breathing room. Instead, I was eating lunch at my desk and calculating how much of my own future had been redirected into someone else's pocket. Marisol called me 6 days after the resale recorded. "I found the relationship," she said. "No greeting, no suspense. Daphne Cole is Bennett Cross's first cousin. Their mothers are sisters. They grew up in the same town. There are public records connecting the family, and I found photographs from a reunion 2 years before your sale, where they are both tagged by relatives." I closed my eyes. It felt terrible to be proven right. Marisol continued. Daphne had also bought another property 2 years earlier in a transaction where Bennett represented the seller, though that sale did not show the same obvious undervaluation from the limited records available. She had formed a small LLC after buying my house, but the purchase itself had been in her name. Bennett had never disclosed any family relationship to me in writing, verbally, or in the agency documents. Priscilla later explained that a real estate agent owes a client fiduciary duties, including loyalty, disclosure, honesty, and acting in the client's best interest. An undisclosed family relationship with the buyer was not a small etiquette lapse. It was a conflict of interest sitting in the center of the transaction. Priscilla sent Bennett and his brokerage a formal demand letter. It laid out Howard's valuation, the comparable sales, the timeline, the resale price, and Marisol's findings about Daphne. It alleged breach of fiduciary duty, failure to disclose a conflict of interest, negligent or intentional misrepresentation, and damages based on the difference between my sale price and the fair market value at the time. Before sending it, she asked me if I was ready. I asked what that meant. She said, "Once this goes out, Bennett will know you are not just upset. He will know you have evidence." I thought about the day he sat in my dining room and told me not to be emotional. I thought about signing documents while trusting his calm voice. Then I said, "Send it." Bennett called me directly 2 days later, even though Priscilla had told them to communicate through her. I almost did not answer, but some part of me wanted to hear what he would say when he knew the facts were on the table. His voice was strained. "Vivienne, I received a very aggressive letter from your attorney," I said. "Then you should talk to her." He said, "This is being blown out of proportion." I asked, "Is Daphne your cousin?" He exhaled sharply. "She is a distant relative," I said. "First cousin is not distant." Silence. Then he said, "That had no bearing on the transaction." I felt something in me harden. "You told me she was stretching. You told me the offer was strong. You told me not to wait," he said. "Based on the information at the time," I said. "Based on the information you chose to show me." His tone changed again, sliding into irritation. "You wanted a quick sale, Vivienne. You cannot rewrite history because the market improved." For months, I had wondered if I was foolish. In that moment, hearing him try to make my trust sound like consent, the embarrassment burned away. I said, "Do not call me again," and hung up. Priscilla was not pleased that he had contacted me, but she said his call told us something. "He is worried," she said. The brokerage responded through its attorney, denying wrongdoing but proposing mediation. Their letter said Bennett's relationship with Daphne was not material because he had represented me, not her, and because I had voluntarily accepted the offer. Priscilla read that sentence aloud with a flat expression and said, "That is not how loyalty works." She prepared me carefully for mediation. We reviewed the timeline until I could explain it without getting lost in emotion. Bennett recommended a low listing price. Bennett selected weak comparables. Bennett presented Daphne as an ordinary investor. Bennett did not disclose she was his first cousin. Bennett advised me to accept quickly and discouraged waiting for additional market exposure. Daphne resold within 11 months for $552,000 with minimal visible improvements. Howard valued the house around $495,000 at the original visible improvements. Howard valued the house around $495,000 at the original sale date. Marisol documented the family relationship. The harm was not that Daphne later made money. The harm was that my own agent deprived me of informed, loyal advice when I needed it. Mediation took place in a conference room with a long table, stale coffee, and a view of a parking garage. I wore a navy dress because it made me feel composed. Bennett arrived with his attorney and the managing broker from his firm. He did not look at me at first. When he finally did, he gave a tight nod as if we were two professionals attending an unpleasant meeting, not a former client and the agent who had betrayed her. Daphne was not there. Her absence angered me more than I expected, but Priscilla reminded me that our strongest claim was against Bennett and the brokerage that supervised him. The mediator was a retired judge named Alan Mercer. He began by saying mediation was not a trial and no one would get everything they wanted. I understood, but I also knew I had already gotten far less than I deserved. Bennett's side opened with the argument I expected. The market had changed. My house needed work. I wanted speed. Daphne took risk. The resale price reflected later conditions. They described the family relationship as regrettably undisclosed but not financially relevant. Priscilla let them finish. Then she walked through Howard's report, comparable by comparable, adjustment by adjustment. She showed that the undervaluation existed at the time of my sale, not only in hindsight. She displayed Bennett's market analysis beside Howard's, highlighting the omitted nearby sales. Then she presented Marisol's evidence: family records, social media tags, a reunion photograph, and the prior transaction involving Daphne. Bennett's attorney objected to the word concealment. Priscilla said, "Fine. We can call it non-disclosure if that makes everyone more comfortable." The duty was the same. At one point, the mediator separated us into different rooms. He came into ours and said Bennett was maintaining that he had believed the offer was fair. Priscilla asked if he was willing to say that under oath after reviewing the omitted comparables. The mediator did not answer directly, he just made a note. Hours passed, offers moved slowly. The first number from Bennett's side was insulting, barely enough to cover my legal fees. I wanted to leave. Priscilla told me low first offers were often theater, but my chest hurt from sitting in the same building as him. Elaine had taken the day off to wait nearby, and during a break I called her from the hallway. She said, "Remember, you are not asking for a gift, you are asking for what he cost you." I went back in. Late in the afternoon, the mediator asked if I would be willing to speak directly to Bennett in a joint session. Priscilla said I did not have to. I thought about it and agreed, with her beside me. Bennett sat across the table, looking older than I remembered. I had prepared facts, but what came out first was simpler. I trusted you because I was in the middle of a divorce and did not know how to evaluate the market myself. You knew that. You knew Daphne was your cousin. You knew the house was worth more than she offered. And you let me believe accepting less was the responsible thing to do. Bennett's jaw tightened. His attorney touched his sleeve. But Bennett spoke anyway. "I did not force you to sign." Priscilla's pen stopped moving. The room went very still. I said, "No. You just made sure I was signing without the truth." The mediator ended the joint session soon after. I do not know what happened in Bennett's room, but the numbers changed after that. Later, during a formal statement taken as part of the settlement process, Bennett admitted more than he had admitted before. He did not use the word scheme. People like Bennett rarely hand you the clean word. But he acknowledged that he knew Daphne personally, that she was his first cousin, that he did not disclose the relationship because he believed it would make the transaction more difficult, and that he understood my property had upside beyond the offer price. He also admitted he had emphasized risks and repair concerns to encourage acceptance of Daphne's offer. The sentence that mattered most was careful but clear. He recognized that additional market exposure might have produced a higher offer. When Priscilla read that line to me, I had to sit down. It was not a full confession in the dramatic sense, but it confirmed the truth I had been carrying in my body for months. He had known. He had guided me away from my own money because the buyer was family. The final settlement came several weeks later. I cannot disclose every term, but it recovered a substantial portion of the difference between my sale price and Howard's fair market value estimate, plus enough to cover expert costs and part of my legal fees. Bennett's brokerage contributed, and Bennett personally paid a portion through his errors and omissions coverage and separate funds. There was also a professional complaint filed with the State Real Estate Licensing Board. Priscilla helped me submit a statement with Howard's report and Marisol's documentation attached. Months later, I learned Bennett had been disciplined for failure to disclose a conflict and for conduct inconsistent with his fiduciary obligations. His license was suspended for a period, he was required to complete ethics training, and the disciplinary record became public. Was it everything I wanted? No. Some days I wanted the entire profit Daphne made stripped away. Some days I wanted Bennett to have to sit with every woman who had ever trusted a professional man in a suit and explain why his cousin mattered more than his client. But the settlement mattered, the discipline mattered, the record mattered. Most of all, the truth was no longer trapped inside my suspicion. It existed in reports, signatures, admissions, and consequences. One of the hardest parts of the experience was explaining it to people who thought a signed contract ended the conversation. A few acquaintances said, "But you agreed to the price." That is true in the narrowest possible sense. I signed because my own agent, the person legally and ethically obligated to put my interests first, gave me distorted advice and hid information that would have changed my decision. Consent built on a professional's concealment is not the same as informed choice. If Bennett had told me, "The buyer is my first cousin, she wants the house below what stronger comparables suggest, and waiting may produce better offers," I would never have accepted that deal. I might still have chosen a quick sale at some discount, because my life was complicated, but I would have made that choice with open eyes. He took that from me. Marisol closed her investigation with a short meeting in Priscilla's office. She handed over a final binder, because Marisol believed in paper, and said something I still repeat to friends. Most clients do not independently verify their agent's pricing. That is why the duty exists. If an agent undervalues a property to benefit a connected buyer, the betrayal is not just the low number, it is the use of professional trust as cover. That sentence put the whole experience into focus. Bennett did not need to forge my name or steal keys from my purse. He only needed to control what I believed at the moment I was making a major financial decision. He made the wrong choice look sensible. He made caution look unrealistic. He made my own instincts feel naive. After the settlement, I did something I had avoided for almost a year. I drove past the old house. I parked across the street for less than a minute. The new owners had planted lavender along the walkway. The blue door was still blue, though brighter, maybe freshly painted. For a moment I felt grief, not just for the house, but for the version of myself who had stood inside it believing the sale was one of the few things in her life going smoothly. Then I felt something steadier. The house was gone from my life, but the lesson had stayed, and the lesson was not that I should never trust anyone. It was that trust and verification belong together, especially when the decision is large enough to shape your future. I used part of the settlement to rebuild my savings. I paid Priscilla. I paid Howard and Marisol. I put some money into a separate account labeled Home Again, not because I was ready to buy immediately, but because I wanted the word future attached to something I controlled. I also sent Elaine a check for the money she had quietly loaned me during the worst stretch after my divorce. She tried to refuse it. I told her, "Please let one part of this story end neatly," she cried, then took it. My relationship with real estate changed completely. When a coworker later prepared to sell her condo, I told her to interview more than one agent, ask for the raw comparable sales, and pay for an independent appraisal if the numbers felt even slightly unclear. I told her to ask direct questions. Do you know the buyer? Have you represented them before? Do you have any personal, family, or business relationship with anyone making an offer? A good agent will answer without making you feel difficult. A bad one may act offended because your questions interfere with the advantage they expected your trust to give them. I do not believe every agent is dishonest. I know many are hardworking professionals who genuinely protect their clients. But I also know that a polished voice and a quick sale can hide a conflict if no one asks the right questions. There were small details I kept remembering long after the case ended. Bennett standing in my kitchen, looking out at the backyard, saying the lot was nice but not enough to move the number much. Daphne's offer arriving so quickly, it almost felt staged. Bennett discouraging an open house because, he said, serious buyers had already seen enough online. His insistence that certainty had value. He was not wrong that certainty has value. He was wrong because he priced my certainty for his cousin's benefit instead of mine. That difference matters. In real estate, a few words from a trusted professional can move tens of thousands of dollars. This is strong. This is risky. This is fair. I would take it. Those phrases sound like advice, but when they come from someone with a hidden interest, they become tools. Priscilla once told me that fiduciary duty is an old-fashioned phrase for a simple idea. When someone is hired to act for you, they do not get to secretly act against you. I wish I had understood that before my sale. I wish I had known that disclosure was not a courtesy but a requirement. I wish I had asked Bennett to put every relationship and every pricing assumption in writing, but wishing backward only goes so far. What I can do now is tell the story plainly. I was not careless because I trusted my agent. I was not greedy because I questioned a resale price that made no sense. I was not vindictive because I demanded accountability. I was a client who had been misled, and I followed the evidence until the people responsible had to answer for it. If you are listening to this and you are selling a home, especially during a stressful life change, please slow the process down enough to understand the numbers. Ask for comparable sales, not just a summary. Look at the houses your agent is using and ask whether they truly match yours. Pay attention if an agent keeps framing speed as the only form of success. A fast offer can be wonderful, but it can also be convenient for someone else. Ask who the buyer is. Ask whether there are relationships you should know about. And if your stomach tightens because something does not make sense, do not let anyone talk you out of checking. My old house sold twice. The first sale taught me what hidden loyalty can cost. The second sale exposed the truth. In the end, I recovered much of what I had lost, but I would rather have had honest advice in the first place. I still think about that blue front door and the woman who walked through it for the last time believing she had made a clean, smart decision. I cannot go back and warn her, so I am warning someone else. What would you have done if you discovered your agent sold your home below market to his own cousin and never told you? Would you confront him first, call a lawyer, or walk away because the papers were already signed? Share your thoughts, and if this story reminds you of someone dealing with a home sale, send it to them before they sign anything. Thank you for listening, and subscribe for more true feeling stories about trust, betrayal, family connections, and the quiet ways people learn to stand up for themselves. I hope your next decision is guided by people who deserve your trust, and I hope you never forget that asking for proof is not being difficult. It is protecting your future.